polls, bad samples, you misapprehended. We did what? Those are just a few of the things we heard about last week's Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota polls we did with NBC News. So this time on Poll Hub, we're answering the feedback. Buckle up. This is going to be fun. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
So we did a lot of polling in the last 10 days. We did a national poll with PBS NewsHour and with NPR, and then we did state polls as we've been doing with NBC News, and these got a lot of attention. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, and we talked about them on the last episode.
As they should, because that is, that's
Midwest.
The upper Midwest, and that's what really turned 2016, and all eyes are there.
And so we were out in the field, one of the first polls to do this with the gold standard methodology, and it got a lot of attention. We talked about these results last week because there were a bunch of results that were really staggering. And a lot of other people talked about the results too, specifically on Twitter. And a lot of people, especially on one side of the aisle, it seemed like more than the other, came after us.
Yeah, in every poll right now, in the environment that we are living in, the polling environment, the public polling environment, you are never going to please everybody, and there's always a brick that can be thrown. And a few, we saw a few flying by the office.
Right. So I wanted to take one of them
in
particular, because there's two kind of themes that we want to talk about on the show today, about criticisms, and not necessarily criticisms, really questions about how we poll.
Well, we do ask for questions, and we do ask for feedback.
And we got them.
We got a lot.
Well, isn't that special?
So one of the people who led this off with is a guy named Luke Thompson, who is at a company called Applecart. It's kind of a Cambridge Analytica type company founded by Republicans, which I guess is the same as Cambridge Analytica. Anyway, they worked in data. Everybody at the company worked in data at various Republican organizations. He has as well. And he basically started this off by saying, I have some thoughts about this NBC Marist poll. They're not nice thoughts because these people did a bad job. And of course, reporters can't read crosstabs still somehow, so it's all over the internet now. Here's the rub with the upper Midwest. A lot of states don't have party registration, which means you need to impute party ID based on a combination of respondent self-identification and past voting behavior. If you have longitudinal polling data, that's ideal. Michigan, no party reg. Minnesota, no party registration. Wisconsin, wait for it, no party registration. Anyway, he goes on and he basically says that if we got into a world of trouble because we misweighted our samples for partisanship immediately. And that's what we did. And obviously, we used a bad weighting schema for all three states, and we don't understand the Midwest, and we don't understand the percentage of Republicans that are there, et cetera, et cetera. And he just didn't really like us. Anyway, to be fair, real quick, we did respond to him. We said we don't wait by party ID, and asked in tweets back to him, say, well, exactly what are you saying, and what do you, and he didn't answer. He just kind of threw the fireball out there and then walked away.
So first things first, he just cost himself an invitation to our holiday party at Marist. I think that goes without saying.
He's based in New York, so he could have made it.
He could have come. Well, you know what? We'll put him in. I'll be that way and overlook some of these.
Be big.
Yeah.
Well, it will be the holidays. That's very generous.
Yes. I think that should keep me with the season. I think that first things first. There's a tendency when you're coming at this from a partisan perspective, when you see results, there's a shoot the messenger approach. First things first. So out of the starting blocks, if you don't like the results, there are things you can say and will say, and that's sort of, what he's at times probably been paid to do,
right,
is to spin it your way. And
that's Democrat and Republican.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When you say partisan, this is both sides. And
sure.
I'm assuming our polls are going to show different things in different states, and we very often get thoughts from both sides.
To go back in time a little bit, a couple years back when we were polling for NBC and the Wall Street Journal, people used to hammer us from one side of the political aisle and say that they were polling for NBC, and the people would hammer us from the other side of the aisle.
You're polling for the Wall Street Journal.
One
being presumed liberal and one being presumed conservative.
That's right. And then at one point, you have to step forward and say, no, folks, it's the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. And I think that, sort of is an attempt at pushback.
Right.
Although pushback doesn't necessarily work these days because people just on social media assert and move on.
And walk on. And that's
so
what
anyway,
this guy did.
Let's get to the
let's
point here.
respond
Yeah, let's
to
get to
what
the
he
point.
was saying, what he's arguing.
Yeah.
Well, I think when he's looking at a poll, just from the language that he was using, I don't need to know that he's worked for a Cambridge Analytica type company or other various Republican organizations, because when you're doing partisan polling, the couple of the things that he talked about, which is looking at party with longitudinal data, polling data from the state, is something that the campaign pollsters do a lot of. In other words, they're not really interested in figuring out what is right now. They're looking at what is and how do we model that to something that will be a winning campaign. So they look very heavily upon past data,
Yeah, and the goals, understandably, their goals are just very different. They want to win. That's not what we're about.
We want to tell people where right now voters are, and they want to figure out how to get voters to the place where their candidate wins and they get the payday.
That's
so
fair.
Yes, there is no party actually enrollment in each of these states.
Mm-hmm.
People do register to vote, but they don't necessarily have to register in a political party. So you don't have to identify that either for the general election or for primaries. They have open primaries, so anybody can really vote.
Which means if you're polling, you do not have a specific population voter registration by party that you can change or look your sample, examine your sample in light of.
You can't weight your sample by party ID when there's no party ID.
ID is a variable.
Even if you were going to do it, you couldn't
party
really do it.
Party ID is a variable.
We call those population parameters. That's the big word for that, which means somebody actually went out and counted it. So you actually have a number that you can look at, and that does not exist in these states. Mm-hmm. And then he talks about, then you need to impute party ID. And impute is it's a statistical term, which means if we don't have the data, we use other factors to try to understand whether a person has that particular characteristic or not. A very broad way of looking at that might be how, if we could look at how they answered questions that had to do with partisanship or have strong correlations with partisanship, or certain demography that a person might have that would likely be a Democrat or a Republican. And then impute means I'm making my best guess. Well, we actually don't make any guesses when we're asking people about party identification. There has been a measure that has been used over decades, which pretty much asks a person to self-identify. Do you consider yourself to be closer to the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, or do you can think of yourself as an independent? And then we actually follow up for those who say independent, and we ask them which party they feel closer to. And what we actually end up with is a 5-point scale, which is strong Democrats, soft Democrats, who are people who think of themselves as Democrats some of the time, or might be independents who lean Democratic. And then the same thing on the Republican side, strong Republicans, those kind of soft Democrats. And
soft
then
Republicans.
I'm sorry, soft Republicans. Now I'm calling everybody a Democrat. Great. And then we have...
Fire up the Twitter storm.
Exactly.
Twitter storm.
Exactly. And then we end up with a very small proportion of people who are just pure independents. They just say, look, I don't have anything really to do with either party. And that's the question we ask. We're not overlaying, anything else, past voting behavior, any kind of longitudinal data.
And let's underscore the point. We do not model to party. We don't weight by party. We wouldn't know how to do it by party ID, even if we wanted to do it. So anytime anybody ever says that poll was modeled to a certain party identification
by us,
haven't a clue how to begin to do that.
But there are people-
or those people who said you oversampled Democrats, which are a whole bunch of people who said, "Oh,
Right.
this is
Which we aren't
bogus
doing-
because you
which we aren't
oversampled
doing anyway.
Democrats."
But
Okay, Barb's
understand, it
gonna-
is getting confusing. It gets
Yes.
very, very confusing because we do not do that. And most public polling organizations do not do that. However, there are polls that do it. Because they feel that they can look back in time. They can look back at previous elections. So they look back to exit polls in a state. So they may go to one of these states which doesn't have any kind of party enrollment or party registration and say, well, okay, what other surveys have been done in the state? And what did those surveys say during that election? And one of the examples are exit polls where they are talking to people who come out of the voting booth. That's not the whole group of registered voters. Those happen to be the people who voted on that day, and they use that to model.
Yeah, let me give you-
Campaigns use that a lot.
Let me give you guys a great example on this. So it was 2008, presidential election, state of Ohio, big doings. We had a party ID, I believe it was plus 7 Democrat in our sample of Ohio, and ultimately that seemed to be confirmed by the exit polls and our toss-up questions between Obama and McCain were proven to be accurate. Fast forward 4 years into the future from that to 2012,
yeah.
and we do a poll. Now everybody says, well, the support for Obama is not as enthusiastic as it was 4 years earlier. And here shows up Marist with a poll of Ohio, and we have, again, plus seven Democratic. So the question is, all the things Barb said we couldn't do, don't do, and wouldn't want to do,
Everybody
was
accused
saying
you.
we were doing.
Oh, they just took 2008 did the same thing.
Some of the sweetest words to me that I saw or read on a tweet was from our sponsor, Chuck Todd. When the vote came in,
At NBC News,
he said, you can spike the football, Ohio plus 7, and it looks like the margin that you saw. The difference being in all that is you get what you get, and we put it out that way. So there's no predisposition to have it a certain way.
Let me try and put it in non-pollster talk and make sure I get it, and hopefully everybody gets it. We don't.
Are you playing the layman
I'm
here?
trying to play the layman.
He's threw us under the bus on that.
So we don't take the poll
Yep.
and say, okay, now how many Democrats should be in it?
Mm-hmm.
How many Republicans should be in it? Based on whatever we want, we don't do that. We ask people which party they're in and let the chips fall where they may.
So right now in the Midwest, we may in fact be finding somewhat of a damaged Republican brand, such that the party ID may be slightly different than what it was 2 years ago. And the notion that Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin all had the same, and we were making it that way.
Yeah, that was another claim, was that we had almost identical in the 3 states. Well, you just took it once and then just put it across the other 2 states?
Yes.
Did that happen?
No. And in fact, I think those were people trying to impute our reputation. That's not right.
No, that's impugn.
Okay. That was a bad pollster pun.
That was terrible.
Bad pollster pun.
So another poll that we respect because they use the same types of scientific methodology that we do, the Marquette poll from Marquette University Law School. They had a poll that ran. They were in the field at roughly the same time. They were a little bit earlier, and they came up with quite different results with regards to the party ID. And again, they don't start with a party ID and model any of that as far as we understand. Sure. How does that happen? Because that is another thing we saw on Twitter, we saw on social is, hey, Marquette said this, Marist said that. One of you guys has got to be wrong. Is that true? Does one of us have to be wrong?
Well, let me give you a kind of like my broad answer on that first. People look and say, boy, one poll did, like you just did, one poll shows A, another poll shows B. Oh my gosh, there's a real conflict. Let's just average them. And what I see when I do this is I look at polls.
And that would be the Emerson poll that came out shortly
That's
thereafter.
right in the middle of the two. But having you got ahead of me on the script. You must be looking ahead. Anyway, but here's the rub in all this is that I think. Totally lost where I was going with that.
That's okay, but I think also
Marquette.
Yeah, we're because I think we'd like to actually have them on.
I just was going to say. Yeah, I know where it's going. Okay, so polls from my way of thinking, given that you might sample differently, you might have different question wording, you might have different quality interviewers, you might have slightly different weighting, you might analyze your data somewhat differently. When people tell me that there's some polls that are quality polls that show a slightly different result, I say, yeah. The thing to me is not that there's a different result. Sometimes I'm even more surprised that polls, given all those variations in methodologies, show the similar result.
Right.
It
So,
seems
but in
almost-
this case, the party ID was it was considerably
and it's
different.
considerably
Yeah. Now, yeah.
different from
In this
what
case.
they have shown also in the past.
Yes.
So I wasn't able to find how they've changed their methodology since 2016.
Because their methodology statements, it basically says that they use the same weighting factors, which is hard data,
Right.
age, income, things like that we do, right?
So I think this might actually be worth a conversation on the
Yeah,
podcast and invite.
and certainly Charles Franklin, who did,
Does the Marquette poll?
at the law
This is
school there.
this
This is a real person
serious.
who's a
Right.
serious scholar of this, and a lot of people look to him as someone who's really on top of things. Having said that, obviously in 2016, their final poll was not good and did tout people in the wrong direction, and that can happen to the best of pollsters.
But in their defense, that poll was completed before the Comey, before the
Yes.
Comey
It was
letter.
several weeks out.
And as you've said repeatedly,
Absolutely.
as with regards to 2016, there was a lot of late-breaking stuff,
Yep.
and there was virtually nobody in the field scientifically in most of the states that ended up mattering. There was almost nobody in the field, and they were certainly not in the field post-late-breaking stuff. And so that's why it was easy to miss on the state level, although we got it and others did on the national
And
level.
our national poll, incidentally, did show, for what it's worth, in our final national poll right before election day, did show some movement, and surprise, surprise, it was in the Midwest and it was going in Trump's direction. So we did see that broad trend. Did we think that he was necessarily going to carry all these states by, 11,000 votes, 12,000 votes, 55,000 votes?
nobody's
No,
going to get that. Yeah.
No.
So
But,
let's
so-
invite Charles
But just
Franklin on
one
from
other-
Marquette,
yes,
and let's talk about
absolutely.
this.
We would like to do that because I think he has changed
done a lot of
some of
good
his
research.
methodology.
And he's also done just good
And they've
research on
they've
polling
done
generally,
good work in
on
the
turnout and
past,
all kinds
so
of
I think
things.
that would be a
Yep.
really good future conversation. Now, we didn't do. I mean, we did get feedback, as you like to say, Jay, about the fact that we missed the polling in these three states in 2016.
Yes.
And actually, we didn't poll.
We weren't in
these
there.
states
Right.
in 2016. The last week we were in Arizona, Texas, and Georgia, and those final state polls were right on, showing.
Yeah, you did a great
Trump,
job of
Trump wins.
of states that didn't matter. Yeah.
Exactly.
As it turned out.
As it turned out.
So
Absolutely.
there was another thing. So this was
Yeah.
the whole you oversampled Democrats.
yep.
There was another arguably more thoughtful argument going on
Yes.
about why don't you wait for education? And this one's kind of interesting because again, we do weight, right? We take the raw results, and everybody, you have to weight it so that it looks like the population as you can define the population through hard data, age, income, a few other parameters that we get from the Census Department, right?
Yep.
But education is one that some people in the polling profession are suggesting, hey, you should be weighting by education because it played a big part in the alleged miss of 2016. And I say alleged because we didn't
didn't
miss
miss.
2016.
We didn't.
And
We didn't.
The
neither
popular
did-
vote.
and
a
neither
lot
did
of
a lot
people,
of pollsters,
a lot of
yeah.
people didn't miss it. It's just that we don't elect presidents by a popular vote. Anyway, so education. Why don't we weight by education?
Well, actually, I wanted to. Maybe I'd like to start, one step back from that, which is why do people think we need to weight by education now? And there's a couple of factors here. One is that people wanted to figure out, well, if there was a miss by polls in 2016, let's go back and see if we can kind of find the answer in the pre-election data. So doing a lot of post-election analysis, now knowing the outcome, a number of organizations went back in their data to see, well, okay, if we did a couple of things differently, could we have would it have changed the narrative? Would it have changed our results?
It's so much easier Wednesday morning.
I know. The Monday, well, it's actually Monday morning quarterbacking.
On
I mean, it's
Wednesday.
on Wednesday for
with
pollsters.
pollsters, it's Wednesday.
Yeah, for pollsters, it's Wednesday. And it is. It's much easier to know what the answer is and then to find a way to get to that. And so a number of people did look at that, and they thought it made some of the states that they polled better. I know that Monmouth looked at it. SurveyMonkey looked at it. Some of their states, it worked really well. So, for instance, when they factored in education in New Hampshire, all of a sudden they thought that they had, the result. It didn't work well in other states like Florida and North Carolina. It actually made those projections in those states worse.
Even worse, yeah.
But one of the things that we do that is different from most of the other public polls today is we weight by income. Something that is very, highly correlated. There's a strong relationship between, education and income. Perhaps, not what it was, back in the day when we started the Marist Poll, but there's still a very strong relationship. And we do that because we don't just ask,
what is your income?
Right. We ask a lot of categories. We ask a number of follow-up questions so that if a person doesn't want to give us a narrow category, we then ask them other questions to perhaps give us a broader category. Remember I talked about imputing earlier?
Yeah.
So instead of imputing, we actually ask people multiple questions and ask the questions a variety of different ways so that they're telling us their answer rather than us trying to guess it.
And a lot of people don't want to do what we're doing by weighting by income,
and because
a lot of people refuse
they don't want to
income
answer.
and they don't get the good data, and then they have to impute the data
So why do we do it?
because we get good data.
We
But
take
it costs,
the time.
but
we
it costs
take-
more.
Well,
I mean, at
we
the end of the
take- we
day, it
take
costs
the
more
ti-
because it's a longer
more.
poll.
It
Yeah.
costs more. We take the time to ask what is actually income is not just a single question. It's actually a battery of questions that we're asking people so that we don't have to guess. And so our response rate on income is about the same
It's
as
comparable to other.
to other
Education,
questions,
whatever.
and particularly education.
So why don't we ask both?
We do ask both.
We ask it. We do collect the data. That's a good
funny
point.
You should say that. And I think that going forward, we will probably be doing some experiments, and we will be transparent about it to show people what are the differences
When you weight by education, or when you add education in as a weighting, you might not take income out. You might add it as an additional weighting.
But recognize
piece
the
of data.
following, and this is really important. Pollsters, like anybody else in the world, have a tendency to fight the last war. And if there is this sense that somehow the polls missed it, which we don't necessarily subscribe to, in 2016,
Well, because we didn't.
the answer then becomes, well, because there's education and missed on education, there were more of these folks voting for Trump, and the polls missed that.
Right.
Well, the reality is that over time, there's been no consistent benefit seen by waiting for education over income, and I think that's important. And I think there's a sense here that, somehow you're solving a problem which you may not be solving. And everybody asks the question about education differently. It's hard to get a true reading on that in the state, as Barb asked, in terms of the information. And there's a whole bunch of things. Nate Cohn did with the Upshot at the New York Times, wrote a series of articles and did a lot of tweets on this very topic in the last few days. And that also created an appropriate amount of
A lot of buzz about this.
buzz. And I think this is a great discussion as long as we stay very open-minded to the conclusions and what it means. A few things Nate said which did not get the play that his call for greater weighting by education seemed to be saying.
And just to reiterate, most of the public polls in 2016 were neither weighting by
Education
Or income.
nor income.
Yeah. So we're dealing with lots of different stuff here. And the simple answer, well, if you weight by education or you don't weight by education, you'll be right or you'll be wrong, is way too simplified. Anyway, here's a few things Nate said this past week. In general, there are a lot of good reasons to think that the factors that we think drove the 2016 polling era won't be quite as acute in 2018. You fight the last war, you may not win the battle. Another thing he said, remember, even in 2016, the state-level polling error that we thought existed wasn't that big outside of the predominantly white working class states. So what he's seeing is it's not a swath
Across
that
the
you can do across the nation. And the final thing that Nate said, which I thought was, again, very interesting, looking ahead to the future war, 2018 midterms, he thinks that the midterm electorate generally is better educated than a presidential electorate because of the turnout differential. If you wait by 2016's electorate, you're going to be off. The closer districts aren't disproportionately working class right now, so when you're looking at generic congressional questions, you may not be getting what you want. He thinks that because of enthusiasm, the typical advantage that Republicans have among likely voters as opposed to registered voters may not be as great. That's going to make it tough in a turnout differential. And he thinks that undecided voters seem to be breaking more towards the Democrats, not the Republicans. All those things are sort of idiosyncratic to what 2018 may be, and make people who are going to look at 2016 and say, if we just did it that way, we would have nailed 2016, so let's do it that way for 2018, at great poll peril.
Because the only thing we can be certain of in 2018 is that it won't look like 2016.
Yeah, for sure, Mr. DeDapper. Are you ready, bud? Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, and that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and we want to thank our executive producer, Mary Griffith, for everything she does to keep us on track.
And putting up with us.
Yes. And what else do we have to say at this point but that we would like to also thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell University, who provide us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions, not necessarily to weight data that way, as we've indicated, but to look back at survey questions and results that people may have found over the decades that are interesting to look at now.
And as we have proven by just spending the last 26 minutes doing so, we'd like your questions. Please send us your questions. The politer, the better. But hey, some people were pretty flaming, and we still answered their questions today on Twitter or on Facebook. You can also do it by email if you'd like, directly to us at Marist Poll.
We love feedback.
We love feedback. And it's a fun show. I mean, there's actually a lot to learn from answering questions from people, I think. Right? Anyway.
It's our big audience, too.
It is our big audience.
Kenny, our intern's over there. How are you doing, Kenny?
Good.
There you go. We'll introduce Kenny more formally in a future episode. Anyway, that will do it this time. And follow us on social media. We are on at Marist Poll at Twitter and Facebook. Also, subscribe wherever you're listening to us. There's a little subscribe button. Hit it, subscribe, and then you'll get the latest episode as soon as it's available. Lee, is your little sound machine?
You mean not if you're still listening to us?
Yeah. Do you have another sound?
Oh,
effect
I
you
guess
wanna
so.
use?
Yeah. Let's see what we'll go with on this time. No, that doesn't work. That's not politically correct. Let me get another one. Here we are.
Why, thank you, Lee.
Let's
I had
just
no
go
idea.
this way. Let's just go this way.
That's very
Thank you very
nice.
much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.